Lightning like Steve McQueen. I'm in the fast lane when the light turns green. And I built tough, I ain't nothing but grit. Cause I made rugged blood, sweat, and spit. Yeah, like a horse I fly. Better push yourself in for a bumpy ride. I like to play hard, but I work harder. And I weather the storm cause I'm built stronger.
What is up, ladies and gentlemen? We are back. We are live. It is the Freight Coach Podcast, the top podcast in transportation, coming to you guys every single weekday, 8:30 a.m. Pacific, 10:30 Central, to break down some industry headlines. But most importantly, you guys provide some actual insight into what all of this means. And today's guest is literally the most qualified person to talk about what we're going to talk about today. And, and break this down, you guys, because I think like in today's day and age with the internet and everything, everybody's got an opinion. But like, is it actually valid or is it just somebody's emotion? So we're going to talk about the law itself, but we're also going to talk about this guy's major promotion that came up here as well. And somebody who I am very proud to have leading this organization now. And he's also a really good friend of mine as well. So with that being said, I got Mr. Chris Burroughs, the new president and CEO of the TIA, on the show. Chris, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it. Always been on your show, man. Appreciate it.
Dude, it's a blast, right? Because like I was saying before we started recording, you speak DC, you speak policy, and it's like you can take, I just renewed for my 5th year as a member of the TIA at this point.
We appreciate that.
And you get to take all of my jumbled up opinions on stuff and be like, yeah, that's a very valid concern, but this is how we say it to actually get a bill passed in DC. Because, my frustrations as a citizen of this country probably don't fly to go in there and actually get meaningful change done out there. And that's why it's like I love having somebody like you now leading the charge.
Yeah, we appreciate that, Chris. And it's truly an honor to take over as president and CEO of this great organization.
Yeah, dude, I'm looking forward to it, right? And I mean, it's perfect timing here because you was been just a couple of weeks now since you officially took control.
Yeah, just a few weeks. Yep. It's actually my official first day. The CST put out the notice post rulemaking on broker transparency. So that was a nice present for my friends over at the agency.
So what, dude, I want to talk about this, right? Because this is one of those things. Because, I've had this show going for, it'll be, 4.5 years now at this point. And broker transparency keeps popping up every other cycle, right? And it's seemingly, my opinion is, I understand why it's, driving memberships and everything else. It's a great rallying cry that goes on. It went away for a few years. Now it's seemingly making a comeback. But, what is freight broker transparency? Like, why is this a thing that people are wanting to push? What is this statute that's out there that is like people are kind of clinging on to, it seems?
Yeah. And funny enough, when I joined the association over 13 years ago, this was actually one of the first issues that we were dealing with back then was broker transparency. And there were some great discussions with groups like ATA and OIDA, and we got some positive language out of it, the Fighting Fraud in Transportation Act. But yeah, so really what this 371.3, which everyone talks about, this part of the Code of Federal Regulations, really goes back to, there's a Federal Register notice from May 12th of 1980 that talks about the business practices or practices of freight brokerages. And what the Interstate Commerce Commission, which no longer exists, they were sunset, but what they were concerned about and talking about when they promulgated these regulations were a concern of the ICCs of freight rebating. Mm-hmm. So essentially, kind of how the equation was set up was obviously you have your shippers, your manufacturers, people who make things, got to let them move their product. You had your trucking companies, not nearly as many, not as nearly as a competitive marketplace, obviously coming off of deregulation as it is today. Same with freight brokerage. At that point in time, brokers were a commissioned sales agent of a trucking company. Mm-hmm. So the ICC was worried about freight rebating, where a scenario where a freight broker could be the same person or common ownership as a shipper. Mm-hmm. And they were concerned about them double dipping. So they put this 371.3 in place to the sharing of financial information between all the parties involved in transaction.
Okay. So essentially what I'm hearing isn't, because like I've done the research on this, again, I don't pay attention to a lot of the social media chatter that's out there. I always like to go straight to the source and do my own research on it. And from what I found is the relationship that a broker and a carrier had back when this was written is vastly different than what it is today, right? Where it was like kind of like how I go out there, like I just made cold calls before we jumped on the show today to a shipper. I would almost do that as a, go out there and try and find trucking companies, find the capacity first, and then go and sell that capacity to a manufacturer, where now it's kind of, it's flip-flop, right? Like most people go out, they find freight themselves from shippers, then they go out and resell that out there into the open market to the carriers. And when I'm reading this now, man, it almost seems to me that this freight broker transparency thing is more applicable to a dispatch service in today's day and age than it is into a freight broker. And that's because the trucking company hires a dispatch service for a percentage that's going on out there.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's the perfect scenario. And it wasn't, talking with companies like Tucker Company Worldwide, which had one of the first authorities, talking with Jeff and Jim, they indicated, back when their dad and their grandfather was running the company, it wasn't long after this regulation was promulgated that the market shifted. And it shifted for a variety of reasons. Obviously, financial being a huge part of that. The shipper terms and payment obviously can be extended, quite frankly, pretty far out, 60, 90, 120 days, whatever the case may be. That's a long period of time for a trucking company, or quite frankly, any company, to kind of float that cash. So the market shifted to where generally where we are now for the freight broker, where you perfectly laid out the scenario. But again, when this rule was written, the intention of what, we have to look, and doing government relations, you got to look at, intent, what's congressional intent, what's the agency intent. The intent of this was to go after the double dipping when a broker was a commissioned sales agent paid by the trucking company for finding them freight.
So how are you guys out there working, because I've seen some of your guys' statements that you guys have released about this. Are you guys mainly going in not to remove this from anything, but change the verbiage inside of this to more accurately reflect present day broker carrier relationships?
Yeah, I mean, at the same time that the two organizations filed their petition for rulemaking, we did file our own petition for rulemaking to eliminate 371.3. Our petition for rulemaking was declined. The agency didn't feel like there was enough justification to delete this regulation. But they did grant the two organizations petitions to move forward with it. So obviously we're being extremely active on this issue. This is a major concern for us. It is a regulation that currently exists. Sure. It must be adhered towards. If a carrier were to request that information from a broker, they should provide it. And then, probably shouldn't make it difficult as, come to the office between the hours of 1 and 2 to pick up your packet. You got to make it easier. But we firmly believe that this regulation is no longer required, obviously, in the current marketplace, as we've laid out, and should be eliminated. And we'll work with the new administration coming in to hopefully achieve that goal. But at minimum, we do not want to see it enhanced. And the notion that the proposed rulemaking, the positive thing of it was that the agency, the FMCSA, although this is a massive overreach by them, they did say, hey, without congressional authority, we don't have the right to come in and say, private companies, we're going to intervene in your contract negotiations. But still, there are some major concerns, obviously, with, the way this is set up. As you know, there are a lot of proprietary contracts that exist between shippers and brokers that would be required to break those, and oftentimes have to pass those contract terms and conditions onto the carriers to make sure that remains proprietary and not shared with the public. So there are a lot of concerns with this. We're activating our members to go out and write campaigns. Like I said, we're talking with transition team for Trump. We're talking with Congress about it as well. We're not holding anything back in order of getting the message out and really kind of going after to defeat this massive overreach by this administration.
Yeah, I mean, I personally think, my honest assessment is like this won't really gain legs out there on Capitol Hill. I feel like from a priority standpoint, this is vastly below fraud and like identity and all of that stuff that's actually out there that's ruining the the industry for far and large, And I think that if we're going to go, one thing I think would hold a higher priority standpoint is, and I want the standards of the industry raised as a whole, right? Like this isn't just an attack on drivers or dispatch companies or brokers or anything like that. But, when there's more hands in the pot, like the dispatch service, for example, they're charging a fee as well. And
Sure.
they're literally going out there to a load board and we're dealing with them. And it's like, if we're going to clean up the process, like, I truly think a lot of the drivers out there need to talk to their dispatch service, because I can't tell you the amount of times that I have booked a load as a broker with the dispatch service who has said, don't tell the driver what we're paying you. All right. Like, I guarantee if we, for some reason subpoenaed all of the phone records that are out there in regards to freight brokers, that has been said more times than not out there. So it's like, who's really double dipping here? Who's really taking advantage of the situation at hand? Because, if you guys, data is everything here. Numbers don't lie. The top 10 freight brokers in North America are essentially all publicly traded for the most part, right? You can look at their financial reports and you can put a pretty good guess on where things are as a whole. And then again, something else just recently came out. I don't have my sources to cite them, but the top 10 freight brokers control 50% of the brokered market as a whole. So if you just basic math with that one alone, the margin percentages that they make as a whole are probably very reflective of what goes on out there in the industry, because like that, they have all the buying power. And I truly feel like if, say, this does, like worst case scenario, this stuff progresses, Chris, I think what this honestly opens it up to is it removes the small carrier from the industry. It removes the small broker from the industry as a whole, because if everybody knows what everybody's making, the people with the deepest pockets will just destroy the market in the short term. They will eat those losses. Everybody will be bled out financially. And then there will be a complete monopoly. There will be an oligarchy of freight, essentially, that will breed from this if this happens. That's where my mind goes from the long term.
No, I think you're absolutely correct on that. Our concern with this, and I think, TIA is often painted as maybe recently kind of like anti-carrier group. We are not. We are a pro carrier group, and we're especially, a pro large and small carrier group. We have great relationships. I personally have a great relationship with OIDA. I've done a lot of work with those folks over the years, and think that's a great organization. But yeah, this potentially could have huge negative impacts on the small carrier, the small broker, and ultimately the end consumer. We're all going to pay for this additional regulation, additional cost to the market. The notion that, I think there's some groups out there that think that, hey, this is a way of getting around the broker and the transaction. These large shippers are not likely to going to work with tens of thousands of small owner operators. They're just not. So it puts a lot of freight to the large carriers, and to your point, potentially could create this massive monopoly. I think you raised a good point about talking about, on Capitol Hill with larger issues. We like to look at data as well. And, fraud is one of these issues that's really impacting our industry. And when Ann and I, our former CEO, talked with FMCSA back in 2020, we said, hey, you've got this national consumer complaint database. We know there's all this talk about broker transparency and everything that's going on. How many complaints in there are there about broker transparency? And they said that, at the time it was 0. I think there's been a few now. Yeah. But we said, okay, how many are there related to fraud? And they said there's about 80,000 complaints related to fraud and double brokering and the issues that everybody's dealing with on a daily basis. So you've got an agency that's really kind of laser focused and truly believes that broker transparency is tied to safety. We would disagree with that, but if heavily focused on transparency and meddling in private negotiations between businesses, hanging their hat on this 1980s regulation. While we have 80,000 complaints dealing with fraud, and they admitted they've done nothing with these, you got 92% of trucking companies who don't have a safety rating. So the agency has failed on every front of providing actual safety data on carriers to the general public, which obviously has created massive problems in terms of nuclear verdicts and carrier selection processes, et cetera. In our opinion, the FMCSA just has completely failed on this and really needs to get their priorities back in line with the industry and the American public.
Yeah. Oh, I'm 100% aligned with you there, man. I feel like the Department of Transportation and the FMCSA really needs to start looking at what's actually a critical issue moving forward in the next, say, 5 to 10 years, as opposed to what is kind of seemingly a selective issue that goes on out there, right? Because again, I'm only exposed to so much stuff out there, but like I have not seen this argument when the rates were high and everything. And again, you guys, I am a capitalist. I want everybody to make money. All right.
Yeah.
I want everybody to make money. I want everybody to be successful. But I feel like, again, because like my kind of final thing on a lot of this, it'll always deduce it down to this, Chris. If somebody else makes money in a transaction, how does that make you a more profitable business, right? If you don't even have a P&L, for example, how can you, knowing what somebody else has in their bank account, how does that make you more money? How does that actually make you a more profitable company? Again, I feel like it's so easy to sit there and outwardly point at everybody else on why your business sucks, as opposed to looking at yourself and seeing, I make $10,000 a month, hypothetical example, in revenue. Maybe I should stop spending $15,000 a month. Or maybe I should go out there and talk to my financial partners to see, can I renegotiate my loan terms? What can I do? I mean, I have these people come on my show all the time from the financial side of things, insurance, all of this stuff, to talk about how can you run a better business as a whole. And I just feel like more people would be very upset at what they're being told as opposed to reality about what brokers actually make on freight, and I know that there's some people out there who are saying that, whatever, don't believe everything you see on social media. Okay. I think like that's a very good starting point, because brokers making 50%, unless it's a $200 LTL shipment and they made $100 on it, that's about the only time I could see that happening. Because like if you're out there moving, and because it is very, very competitive in the full truckload space, dry van, reefer, flatbed, very competitive. You're not pulling those kind of margins that are out there. I've never personally witnessed that in the 15 years I've been brokering freight. And maybe I'm just a bad freight broker then, right? Maybe that there's people out there who have these endless budgets, but I've just never seen them. And then again, I think ultimately when it breaks down to the transaction level, how does this make you a more profitable business? Because again, you have to go out there then and get the business from the shipper. And when you go in there, because even as a broker, I'm dealt with this, right? We go in there. If I can't move the needle for them from a capacity standpoint based on where my business is at today, say maybe they need a broker that can move 50 or 100 loads a day. I can't do that. Guess what? I'm not going to get that business. They're not even going to give it to me. Yeah. And it's like, I feel like we got to start looking at, instead of, oh, this is why my business sucks. No, it's not. Ultimately, you got to start inward and then work yourself outward like that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And from an organization perspective, we want everybody to succeed, obviously, in this.
Yeah.
In this industry, we wouldn't be here without small owner operators.
Correct.
I mean, they're our lifeblood for our capacity to make sure that we're moving our customers' freight, and that relationship is solid and should be solid. So yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. You're talking about budgeting. I wish the federal government did a much better job of that. As we're sitting here, $35 trillion in debt, and I think I was telling you before, I just saw this stat over the weekend that the federal government spent $46 billion roughly on the IRS to increase enforcement and go after some of these tax cheats, if you will. They brought in $4 billion from that 46. So the math on that is not really good in terms of ROI. But hey, that's the federal government for us. So their infinite wisdom in a lot of things is pretty much wrong.
No, and that's why it's like I'm looking forward to kind of how things are going to progress here to really clean up a lot of this stuff, right? Because I feel like the FMCSA, for example, and the DOT, like I truly feel like we have our priorities just completely backwards on where things need to be. Because if you want to talk about freight theft as a whole, the economic cost that has out there in the market, what that does to the end consumer prices, it's like, I mean, it's pretty simple. Like when you go to the FMCSA and there's like 800 MCs at the exact same address, like that's acceptable. But like, we're talking about how somebody, again, I don't want to go too far off because I'm gonna start freaking here. But so, dude, what's on the docket for 2025 from you guys? Are there any other bills that you guys have in the works right now that you guys are really looking forward to getting some exposure out there?
Yeah, obviously, kind of my big two priorities for the immediate future in 2025 is obviously continue to enhance our advocacy efforts. That's kind of a no-brainer. That's my background. I think that's a core component of our organization is being the voice of the industry on Capitol Hill, and additionally member engagement. So you're going to see a lot more regional meetings from TIA in 2025, in addition to enhancing those advocacy efforts. I think, the other piece of legislation we've been working on for a while is really trying to get to the core of these nuclear verdicts that are going on. Obviously, tort reform is extremely hard, if not nearly impossible to get in the current political environment. But we've got to find some sort of solution to these massive nuclear verdicts that are coming down on companies that, again, are taking the information that we have available to us, albeit not a lot of information. Again, 92% of trucking companies are unrated. And unfortunately, when there's an accident, everyone's getting brought into this. The shipper, the broker, the carrier's got to deal with it. We're all familiar with the Werner case that happened. No fault of their own, but there's obviously a huge settlement there. So we got some legislation working on that. Obviously, we have legislation on dealing with the issue of fraud that we'll look to resurrect in the new Congress to get that passed. And again, that piece of legislation, really is just telling the FMCSA, hey, these are regulations and authority and enforcement authority you guys already have on the books. We as Congress mean it. So let's start enforcing, to your point, the principal place of business requirement. They're not enforcing that. Mm-hmm. We flagged that house in Wyoming for the agency. They sent an investigative team out. They came back and said, hey, there's no one operating out of this, no less 400 trucking companies. And I said, what are the next steps? And said, nothing. We're not doing anything with it. Oh, great. It's a completely inept agency at this point. Yeah. That we've got to start getting to some of these core issues and addressing problems that exist, like fraud, like finding reliable truck parking for people to safely be able to park their vehicle at night. Let's get safety ratings for all the carriers. Let's make it, that helps everybody. It helps brokers, it helps small, large trucking companies, helps everybody.
That's wild to me that it's not wild to me that they sent an investigative team out there, what's wild to me is they proved that there was nothing there, yet they're literally doing nothing with that, right? Like I just feel like like that to me is the federal government in a nutshell right there. Hey, yeah, we spent more money to go check out the problem, but we've identified that there's a problem, but we're not going to do anything about said problem, right? Like, I mean, imagine how many people. I would love to see if somebody could break down the data on the numbers of fraudulent shipments those grouping of carriers alone, what that costs the small carriers out there as a whole in lost freight and everything else, right? Like, again, it's just that to me is that would be the most pressing issues. And then especially with, advancements in AI and other forms of technology, that it's going to be harder and harder for people to detect who these people actually are. And then essentially pretty much it's going to be a bot farm that's out there double brokering freight here in the next couple of years. And yeah, Cody, I agree, man. We need Elon and Vivek to start digging into the FMCSA and the DOT right away.
Yeah, I think DOJ should take a good look at the FMCSA. And they got a ton of money through that bipartisan infrastructure package a few years ago. Hundreds of millions of dollars, and a lot of it was to bring in some more enforcement team to the agency. It was a year or so after the money had been allocated out, and we asked them. We said, "Hey, where do you guys stand on bringing in some more enforcement arms for the agency?" And they're like, "Well, we're having a hard time hiring a recruiter, so we haven't really got far." I mean, it's always a resource issue. It's always going to be a resource issue. I mean, literally, Congress could write a blank check to the FMCSA, and it always will be a resource issue. So when does it become a resource? When it's really not a resource issue, but when does it become hey, there's some serious problems going on in this agency that need to be addressed in terms of waste and abuse. Yeah. So I hope they take a good look at it and see what they find.
Yeah. And that's exactly where we need to be, right? Like we need to start, and this is why it's like, I mean, I'm glad you brought up the whole more regional meetings and stuff like that for the members, because I feel like a lot of this stuff, again, so many people are so ingrained in their day-to-day lives and businesses and everything else that I'm not shocked anymore at this, Chris, because I literally interview people every single week. on this show. And it is like, man, everybody's in there, rightfully so. They're in their own little worlds. They don't know exactly all the laws and rules and regulations that are out there, pending bills and stuff like that. So it's like, I like to see this. And I think it'd be cool. Again, I'm not going to put any words in your mouth, but like maybe do some cross pollination with some of the trucking groups as well. And on the regional basis, maybe we can co-host some events where we can kind of get a better understanding about what it is, because I truly feel like ultimately we all want the same thing, right? Like we all want to make more money. We all want less hands in the pot and everything else. So I feel like it'd be nice to kind of see that joint effort out there. But again, people, you need to get involved in your local groups, especially if there's regional meetings that are going on out there. And if you're really upset, call your congressman. All right. It's all out there. Call your congressman and start voicing your concerns that way.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, perfect, man. Chris, as always, I appreciate you joining the show. And, I always like having, you and the TIA on the show, because like you guys are literally at the forefront of this stuff. And I hope this clears up a lot of the confusion that's out there for people, because everybody's got an opinion on social media, but you guys are the ones who are actually fighting this stuff out there on Capitol Hill. So Chris, thank you so much for joining me. I mean, what's the best way? Just go to tianet.org for everybody to find out more.
Yeah. To visit us right there at tianet.org. Got everything online. Appreciate it, Chris.
Perfect. Sounds good, Chris. And that's going to be it for today, you guys. We got guests coming on this week. I know it's the week before Christmas, but we don't stop here, you guys, because I'm actually in the trenches making things happen. But as always, if you guys got value in what you heard, subscribe to the show, you guys. Share it out there to your network, because if you see value, your network's going to see value as well. I appreciate you guys. I love you guys, and we'll be talking to you soon.